I'm going to ask Brian Kelly to come up and speak. He is the Manager of Sustainability for the region of Durham, and before that he was the advisor to the region on climate change. He served as founding director of the Sustainable Enterprise Academy and the Executive Education Program at the Schulich School of Business at York University, and he taught business strategies for sustainability at the MBA level. He's acted as Director of Environment and Sustainable Development for Ontario Hydro, President of Marbreck Resource Corporate Consultants, Director of Energy at Energy Mines and Resources Canada, and was the founder of Pollution Pro. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll recognize one other founder of Pollution Pro, Peter Love, sitting in the second row there. Thank you. My presentation is going to be quite different from Fernando's. Originally, I was hoping that because of Rob's delay, I was going to go first and then we could have an ascending order of experience and complexity in this area. I'm going to start at deliver the baseline, as it were. The region of Durham, thanks Fernando for putting up that diagram, but the region of Durham was off the screen to the right. So we are the regional government east of Toronto. You probably know it when you drive east. Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Oshawa, Clarington, and 3 northern, more agricultural townships. We have been at the back end of the parade on sustainability and climate change for some time. No doubt about that. We were a laggard. We are attempting to jump towards the front of that band of municipalities. I don't claim that we're there yet. We have the advantage of looking at other people's progress and building on it. One of our philosophies is that imitation is the highest form of flattery. So as I go through our climate change plan that was just released last month, you'll probably see echoes of other programs that you are familiar with. And City of Toronto is clearly way ahead of us in this area. They had a climate mitigation program in 2007 and a climate adaptation shortly after that. So I'll take you through this quite quickly, try and draw some conclusions, and then get into the presentation. This is our process. We started in 2009. Undertook a phase 1 in 2010, a phase 2 in 2011, and I'll explain a little bit more in detail what those are. We have recently had approval of our climate change community level mitigation plan and are moving into program implementation and coming back to do an adaptation plan to complement our mitigation plan. Phase 1, we established a vision that Durham region is a carbon neutral, sustainable, prosperous, and resilient community with a high quality of life. I think that's quite a nice, aggressive, but balanced vision statement. We have some community targets that are familiar to most of you, adopted by many other municipalities, basically a 5% reduction from a 2007 baseline, I will point out. A 20% reduction by 2020 and an 80% reduction by 2050. The set of programs in the plan that I'm going to talk about are capable of meeting that midterm target. We're not going to have much trouble meeting the short-term target thanks to the coal phase out in Ontario. That plan was adopted by Regional Council almost 2 years ago, and we are locked into attempting to achieve our community targets. Phase 2, I took over this process about when we were starting phase 2. The focus was on how can you put forward a handful of implementation programs to achieve those targets. We had a lot of stakeholder engagement, a lot of community interest group engagement. There were literally 101 action suggestions. How do you boil that down to aggressive but implementable programs to achieve progress? And that's what we did in phase 2. Phase 3 was released last month. I have a few copies of it here for the keeners in the crowd. It's certainly available on the Durham website under the Climate Change tab. There's a short brochure describing the plan. Again, we're late to the party, but I think we bring some advantages from that. So the document outlines a rationale for local action, sets a context. We've had one emissions inventory done for Durham. We're in the process of repeating that 4 years later. Our vision, mission, targets, and process, 18 potential programs. The document outlines 18 action plans that we want to move on. They are all described in there. I'll go through them quickly in a few moments. One has been approved to date. That is our version of Partners in Project Green, which is the TRC, Toronto Region Conservation Authority program that's run in the industrial business area around Pearson Airport. We have cloned that program, brought it to Durham in a modest way, and that has been launched. I think one of the things that distinguish our work, perhaps from earlier pieces of work, is that we've done a fairly thorough job on quantifying the impacts, what I call the impacts and co-benefits. We've attempted to do a triple bottom line analysis of this set of 18 programs, and I'll talk briefly about that in a few moments. We have our implementation strategies. We're moving forward now on an adaptation plan and some next steps. Each of these programs, one is approved to date. Each of them now has to be fully developed, bring forward the business case, and in most cases, not all, but most cases, achieve regional council approval and, where appropriate, funding to launch these programs. So you can think of it as approval in principle, but each of these programs needs to come back for further scrutiny, and that's what's occupying my time for the next year or two. The document was completed in September. It was approved by our DRRCC, which is our Durham Region Roundtable on Climate Change, approved by our Regional Council in October. Again, it's not a set of programs that have been given final approval, it's a plan. This is the list of the 18 programs, each of which is described more fully in the document. I'll hand out the secret decoder rings later so you can figure out what the color coding means, but I'll give you a couple of hints. Durham Partners in Project Green is the clone of Partners in Project Green around the Pearson Airport that we're delivering in Durham. The 5 programs in green have been declared our top priorities for implementation by our governing committee, and we are moving forward on a comprehensive residential retrofit program that relies in significant part on the recently approved local improvement charge, recently amended local improvement charge mechanism. And if you don't understand that, we can get into it later. This is a particular focus. We're taking a very aggressive approach to this one because that program alone is capable of delivering 40% of our GHG reductions and a huge part of our positive economic impacts and our jobs. You saw some numbers from Fernando on the history of the Toronto energy efficiency initiatives and the economic impact and the job impact of those. I think one of the distinguishing features of our plan is we've tried to sell it to the politicians and to the other decision makers based on it being a significant economic development opportunity. We're trying to break that old mindset, that old mental model that you've got environmental protection or economic development and you have to trade off between them. We know that's no longer the case, but we need hard numbers to prove it, and we've attempted to do that. Green affordable housing is a focus on our social housing sector. It's really a subset of that program. Durham Green Building Guideline is dealing with new buildings. Currently, we are not legally able to have our own building code. This is our attempt to do what we can in a voluntary program. Smart Grid Initiative, something I'll come back and discuss a little bit more in my conclusions. In terms of renewable energy, and I think there's a nice balance in this program of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and other initiatives. One of our biggest renewable resources in Durham is south of us. It's Lake Ontario. It contains a huge amount of cold water and good wind regime. So we are attempting to analyze and move forward on an offshore wind power generation. Right now that is stalled by provincial moratorium on offshore wind, which we hope would be lifted in the near future. And again, along the lines of imitation is the highest form of flattery. We are very aware of the N-wave system here in Toronto that may be cooling this building today even. And we want to see if there's a case for doing our own mini deep lake water cooling systems. We also have a Durham biofuels program. The largest industrial sector in Durham, which is the headquarters of GM in Canada, is not the automotive sector. It's, surprise, surprise, the agricultural sector. By a hair. So why shouldn't we look at Durham being a center where we develop second-generation biofuels, cellulosic ethanol, and biodiesel? We have the farmland and the marginal farmland to grow the dedicated energy crops, to feed them into second-generation biorefineries, and back out a significant portion of the gasoline and diesel fuel used, particularly in our transportation sector. So that's one of our big programs, and surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, it's a very big positive job impact. You employ a heck of a lot of farmers growing the feedstock crops to put into even a modest-sized refinery that's capable, if it were a biodiesel refinery, of backing out all of the diesel used in the entire system in Durham region. Biomethane production and use. If any of you are going down the checklist and following off the very inspiring video that we saw from Denmark, you'll see that we have emulated that to some degree, certainly not to the degree that they have integrated that, at least conceptually, if not practically, in Denmark, but we have some of the same elements. We have a particular focus on the agricultural sector, so a local food hub, an urban agricultural program, and a set of farm-friendly regulations to enable farmers to stay on the land and pass that family farm on from one generation to the next. So a set of 3 programs on food, 2 of which, remember the green color coding, are our high priority programs for this year. A Durham 5 Million Trees program, another high priority program. Active transportation and transit, our new build planning, and to some degree community retrofit program to increase those densities, increase the use of public transit, walking, biking, etc. And then a few other programs at Durham, free cycle program to complement what is already a very well-performing solid waste management system in Durham, a green procurement guideline, community climate fund, and lastly, another priority for this year, a climate education fund. So those are our 18 programs that are in this plan. I said we did analysis. This is a qualitative presentation of quite a thorough quantitative analysis of these programs. So you see the 18 programs down here, and by symbols, the number of down arrows shows the amount of GHG reduction that we could expect from implementation of that program. We haven't quantified all of them. As you read across, there's a few rows that don't have much in them, but we've quantified, in most cases, GHG reductions. We've indicated whether there's a positive association with improved local air quality, vegetation cover. We've done a sampling of economic indicators. Number of dollar signs indicates the strength of the positive impact on the local economy, and that does include the respending effect or the keep the dollars circulating in Durham effect that Fernando referred to. And then lastly, in the social category, employment generated in Durham, household and business, utility savings, and positive health impacts. We have a few next steps that I've already alluded to. We were asked to have provide you with some reflections on the themes of this seminar. And I will fully admit that so far the subject matter of this seminar, which is community energy planning, has been driven by our efforts to catch up and fulfill our obligations on climate mitigation. So it's represented by that plan. Secondly, in Durham, we are quite dispersed. We have a geographical footprint that I think is a little larger than the city of Toronto. We have 625,000 people in Durham. Most of our population is centered right along the lake shore. You pass through it as you drive east from here on Highway 401. So there is a perception abroad in the land. I've been told by senior planning officials and senior politicians that this community energy planning, and more particular this district energy system thing, is fine for Toronto, but sorry, we just don't have the densities in Durham to make it practical and economic. And I'm not sure that's the case. And we have at least one historical anomaly that says that's not the case. In the town of Ajax, which you may know during the Second World War was the center of munitions production and was basically a town that was created by the Second World War and then became a planned community afterwards. We've had almost since the Second World War, a downtown district heating system that served many of those industrial buildings that were created to make munitions for the Second World War. So I believe that in certain pockets in Durham, we do have the density for district heating, cooling, and integrated energy systems. I need to convince some skeptical planners and politicians that that's the case. Without going any further, we can all agree that we need supportive provincial policies in this area. That's the whole purpose of this seminar. Clearly, also, the province needs to renew and recommit to energy efficiency. Gord Miller, the Environmental Commissioner of the Environmental Commissioner's Office, has made that point very solidly over the last couple of months. I will say, though, that the recent amendments to the local improvement charges, or what we call LIC, and that's not the hamburger chain, or something even more salacious, the recent amendments to the local improvement charge mechanism does, I think, provide a huge opportunity for municipalities to finally do a thorough job on both residential and potentially commercial institutional building retrofit. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about when I say LIC, we can get into that in the question and answer period. And lastly, I would observe that the potential for the smart grid to serve the larger need of community energy planning, I think, is being squandered. We have a provincial fund, I believe it's $50 million, for smart grid demonstrations. I think we need to reframe that program. We need to do it in the context of that Denmark example, so that we're not just talking about how do we integrate a little bit of distributed generation on a grid and give people a little more control of their energy, but we need to embrace the storage mechanisms, the heat side of the equation, and all of those good things. So with those remarks, I conclude, and I invite your questions in the Q&A session. Thank you.